Great work. And up next, I want to cover how to send emails with Node.js. Just like image upload, we're going to also implement it in our upcoming APIs. But since there will be larger projects, I want you to be comfortable and have reference to email sending before we get there. And the idea is following. We have the home route. So we have the homepage where we have the link to /send. And once we navigate there, we send a test email. And if you take a look at the account we're about to set up, you'll see that the email is there. So that's my last hello here. And we have here sending emails with Node.js. As far as the setup, we're looking for 08 send mail. Again, we have the final and a star. So we're looking for the starter. So I'm going to go with CD, then starter. And once we're here, we have controllers folder with just one send email. So this is where we'll set up all of our logic. We have DB folder, but this one here is just for showcase. Essentially, we're not going to connect with database in this project. Of course, we have the errors one as well as the middleware, but I mean, we will set them up in app.js, but it's really not going to be the case where we'll use them that much. App.js with pretty typical logic where we got .env, express async errors, express, as well as not found, an error handler. We use express JSON, even though technically in this project, we're not going to rely on that. This is also just here for showcase. The app.get, where we have the heading one, both of the middlewares for not found and error handler. The port, I think I'm going to switch back to 3000. So most likely, if you're looking at your project, you have 3000. And like I just said, we're not going to use the database. So in here, we simply have start, where we go with app.listen, and then the port value. Now, before we can run the app.js, we need to install. So we're going to go here with npm install, and then we're going to go with npm start. And in this project, I actually didn't set up the routes because we only have one controller. So we might as well set that up right away in the controllers and then import it in the app.js and just set it up here below the get. So this is going to be our home route. So let me test it out here. So I'm going to navigate to my browser and I'm going to look for localhost and 3000. Yep, I can see the email project. And the way it's going to work, we will set up a link to another page, to a send page, but it's still going to be a get route. So that way we don't need to implement the postman and all that. And the way we'll set that up, we'll have here app.get, and right after the heading one, let's just set up that link. So again, we'll be cheating a little bit, and we're going to go with a link to a send email. And here I want to say /send. So that's the route we haven't set up yet. We'll do that in a second. So let's add our link here. And right below it, let's just go with app.get. And the route is /send. And as far as the setup, technically you can code everything here in app.js. Now in my case, I'll still set up everything in the controller. So in here I have send email. Let's just set it up as a function. So send email, and we have the async, we have rec and res. For time being, let's just send back some kind of dummy value. So I'm going to go with res.send and not send email. My apologies. We're going to go with res.send, and we're looking for send email func, which is going to stand for functionality. And then all the way in the bottom, we're going to go with exports and my apologies, module.exports. And in this case, I'm not going to export it as an object. I'm just going to go with send email. And back in app.js, anywhere where you would like. I guess in my case, I'm going to go above both of my middlewares. I'm going to go with send email. That's going to be my controller. So I'm going to go with require. We're going 2 levels up, or maybe only 1. So we have controllers here. We have send email. Then let's scroll down, copy, and set it up over here as the controller. So now if I go back to my project and if I refresh, I have this tiny link. I click here, and I see the send email func. So this is where we'll set up all of the functionality. And once we have the general structure in place, now we can start exploring email sending with Node.js. When it comes to sending emails, it's actually much simpler and straightforward than you think. And the reason for that is because there is a package, surprise, surprise, there's another package that does all the heavy lifting for us. So we only need to provide few values and we're good to go. The package name is Nodemailer, and it is by far the most popular option for sending emails. As far as the setup, if you take a look at the docs located at nodemailer.com, you can see that install command is npm install, or I for short, and you're just looking for the package name Nodemailer. Then if we keep on scrolling, the actual logic is here, where we get the Nodemailer. So we require the package. Then if we have test account, we go with create test account. And this is going to make way more sense after the following video, where we'll actually set up the service, which is the next thing that we need to do. So we need to create a transporter using create transport, where essentially we connect to the service that does the sending. So we have Nodemailer that will set up the logic, but we still need some kind of service that will do the sending part. And again, this is going to make way more sense after the following video, where we will set up a test account with one of those services. And of course, in the next video, I'll cover all of this in greater detail. And as far as the actual logic, here it is. We just go with transporter. So once we have provided the credentials for the service, we go with send mail, and then, I probably don't need to explain from to subject, text, and HTML. The only gotcha probably here is that as far as our email, so who the email is from, well, we need to set it up here in the angle brackets. That's all there is to it. Now, if we want HTML, we go with HTML property, and then we can provide elements. And if I want to send plain old text, then we just set it up as a text property. And once we're familiar with Nodemailer, now let's talk about the services that do the sending part. Okay, so we're clear that we'll use Nodemailer, but another crucial part of the setup is a transport service, which Nodemailer will use to send the actual emails. As far as our options, for testing, we can use services like Ethereal or Mailtrap. And for production, most popular options are SendGrid and Mailgun. You can also use the good old Gmail account for this, but we're not going to do that in this course. The good news is that going from testing setup to production setup is as smooth as it gets. You simply need to swap the credentials and you're good to go. For testing, I decided to go with Ethereal, which is completely free, fake SMTP service. And what I really like about Ethereal is that you can set up an account in a matter of seconds. Just navigate to ethereal.email. Again, the website is ethereal.email, and create a new account. And once you do, you'll see all of these values, where essentially you have the name, you have the username, as well as the password. Now, in order to log in and check your emails, you'll need these values. Just remember that if for some reason you lose them, you can create as many accounts you want. Like you just saw, it happens in a matter of seconds. So I wouldn't lose my sleep over it, meaning I wouldn't worry about not saving these values and stuff along those lines. And as far as the configuration, notice how this matches exactly to what we have in Nodemailer, where essentially we're just connecting to Ethereal. We provide here the host, the port, as well as our username and password. Lastly, like I just mentioned, going from testing to production is really just about changing these credentials. So you'll pick your service, you'll get your actual credentials, and then in order to connect, you'll have to provide them over here. And therefore, normally, you'll set them up in .env, because of course you don't want to share them with the rest of the world. You want to keep them confidential. Now, I'm not going to do that in this project. Just keep in mind that Normally, that is the setup where you set up process.env and then you'll just use the variables over here. And once you have the ethereal account, once you have all the proper values to create transporter, then we can start finally sending emails with NodeMailer. Beautiful. And once we have the ethereal account, let's navigate back to the NodeMailer docs and follow the steps to send the email. First, we need to get the NodeMailer. Then, since we have ethereal, we'll go with create test account and you can read the rest. So let's navigate back to our project. We are looking for send email controller. And here, let's start by getting the NodeMailer. So const NodeMailer. NodeMailer. Then inside of the send email, we're going to go with that test account since we have ethereal. So let's go with let or const. Doesn't really matter. In docs, they have let. So I'm going to stick to that. So let test count is equal to await, then NodeMailer dot and create test account. So invoke that. And then we want to connect to our service. Remember, basically we have create transport and then we pass in the values. Now, since we have the code already in ethereal, just so we can save a little bit of time, we can navigate back and basically I'll grab these lines of code. If you want, you can set it up from the scratch. And again, let me say it one more time where if you are using one of the services, the production ones, and if you're using their values, make sure that you set them up in .env. For ethereal, it doesn't really matter. That's why I'll just pass right away in the create transport. Hopefully that is clear. Let's navigate back, copy and paste. And then we want to go back to the docs and we want to go with transporter, send mail, and then provide rest of the values. So that one, we'll type it out. So let me close the sidebar just so we have a little bit more real estate. And we go with let info and we await. Then transporter, the one that we just created. Basically, we connected to the service. So now we have transporter and we want to go with send mail function. And in there we pass in from. So who's the email from? And in my case, I'm going to go with coding addict, coding, and then addict. Then we need to provide our email. And therefore we need to use the angle brackets. So I'm going to go with coding addict and then at gmail.com or mail.com. So I'm going to go with gmail.com. After that, we want to go with to. So who is going to receive the email? In this case, we just go with the email address and we don't need to use the angle brackets. And if you take a look at the docs, if you want to provide multiple, just add a comma in between. So in my case, I'm just going to go with bar at example.com. So example.com. Then we want to go with subject. So in here, let's go with subject property. And I'm just going to go with hello, comma. And after that, you have two options. Either you go with text or HTML. So if you have HTML, then you can provide element. And this is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go with HTML. And then let's set up the heading 2. And inside of the heading 2, I'm going to go with sending emails with Node.js. Sending emails with Node.js. With Node and JS. Let's save it. And as far as the response, normally this is not what you're going to do, but in my case, I'm going to go with res JSON and I'll send back the info. So I'm going to go here with info just so we can see on the screen what response we get back. Now let me navigate to localhost 3000, make sure to refresh, then send email. Eventually you will see the response on a screen. Again, not something that you're going to do in the production. And if we take a look at the ethereal, more specifically, open mailbox, what do you know? We have the email to bar at example.com. It is a hello email. and it says sending emails with Node.js, and it's coming from Coding Addict. And just like that, we know how to send emails with Node.js. All right, and once we know how to send emails with testing service like Ethereal, let's try to do the same thing with SendGrid, which is probably one of the most popular email providers for production. And just like Ethereal, SendGrid has very clean and easy to understand UI, as well as the overall flow. And no, in my experience, that's not the case for other options out there. I personally find Mailgun, another popular choice, somewhat confusing. In order to follow along with the videos, you will need to create a free SendGrid account, and you can do that at sendgrid.com. Again, the URL is sendgrid.com. And lastly, take my friendly advice, and when setting up the account, use one of your real email addresses. Trust me, you'll save yourself a lot of time. Also, be prepared for countless verifications. They're kind of big on that. Other than that, the setup is fast, and once you have the account, continue with the videos. And once you have the account, you should see a screen that looks something like this. And the first thing we need to do is to set up a sender identity, which essentially is an email address that SendGrid is going to use to send emails on our behalf. So bravely click on create a single sender, and then just fill out the form. So here we have the name. I'm going to go with Coding Addict. Then we need to provide the email address. So this is an email address that SendGrid is going to use to send emails on our behalf. And again, please provide a valid email address because you'll have to verify it. I'll use one of my course ones. I believe it is learn code tutorial at gmail.com. And as far as reply, I'm going to use the same one. Then we need to provide the company address. And once in production, it's a good idea to provide a correct address of the business. But in my case, I'm just going to come up with some dummy values. And once you have filled out all the fields, just create identity. And like I said, you'll have to verify the email address. So head on over to your email account and then verify the sender. And once that is done, then we can start worrying about setting up the API key. And once we have set up sender identity, next we want to create an API key and start sending emails using the SendGrid. So in the dashboard, look for email API and then the integration guide. Then you'll need to choose the web API. After that, we're going to go with Node.js. And lastly, here we'll create an API key. So you just need to come up with a name. In my case, I'm just going to go with my first API key. Let's create the key. And once we have the key, we want to go to .env, grab the key, copy and paste, and set it up as the environment variable. And again, the name is really up to you, but I'm just going to go with this SendGrid API key. So let's do that. We're going to navigate back to the starter and create a new file, .env, and we're going to go with SendGrid _ API _ key. And now you just want to get that value. So I'm going to copy and paste the value. And once everything is in place, then we want to install the package. So take a look at the package.json. If you already see at SendGrid email, so that's the library they created for us, then you're good to go. Then you can right away start the server. But if you don't see it in the package.json, which is going to be my case since I'm adding these videos later, therefore I'm going to copy this command, go back to my setup, run the install command, start up the server, and then in the package.json, I should see somewhere the SendGrid /mail. And then pretty much the code is already prepared for us, where essentially, again, they import the library, they set up the API key, which in our case is in the .env. So we just use process.env. We set up the message where we have to from subject, text, and HTML. And then we just use the function to run it. So let's try it out. Where first I want to go back to send mail. And the first thing that I want to do is to rename this send email because I do want to leave this for your reference. And since we are already exporting send email, this is where we'll set up the SendGrid functionality. So let me just go here and say ethereal. So that's going to be my function. Now I do have a massive bug because at the moment I'm exporting something that doesn't exist. So let's create one from scratch. We're going to go with const send an email. So that's going to be our controller async rec and res. Then we want to go back to the SendGrid, and line by 9 we'll just get the code. So first we want to set up the variable just like we did with node mailer. Then we want to create that API key. So let's go over here and then in the send email, and you know what, I'll collapse this just so we have a little bit more real estate. I'm going to copy and paste the set API key. Then what we're going to do is set up that message. And eventually, of course, we'll call the SendGrid as well. So in here, as far as the message, well, we need to come up with an actual email. That's where we want to send. And in my case, I'm going to use one of my other dummy accounts for the courses. And that's going to be learncode@mail.com. So let me type learncode@mail.com. Now, as far as the from, this one needs to match whatever you set up in that sender identity. Otherwise, you're going to get the error. In my case, that was learn code tutorial@gmail.com. And the rest of the values, I'm just going to leave it the way it is, just so we know that everything works. And then when it comes to this one, we can actually stick a weight in front of it. And then if we're successful, then we'll just send some dummy string back. Or, you know what, we can actually assign it to some kind of variable and maybe try to do the same thing like we did over here. Remember the send email ethereal? We send back the info. Let's try to do the same thing over here, where I'm going to go with const. I'll also call this info. That is equal to my SendGrid variable .send. So let's go here with await, my variable name, then send. We'll pass in the message here. And then when it comes to response, let's just go with res.json and let's send back the info. Now, again, the whole idea is to send an email. So let's see what we actually have back as an info. The most important part is to get that email in learncode@mail.com. Let me see. It doesn't look like I have any errors. That's always a good sign. So let me go back here to a new browser window, and then let's send the email. I'll click it over here, and it complains that I'm not authorized. Interesting. Let me double check, and I think where the bug is. So in here, they have SendGrid. And back in my .env, of course, I went with SendGrid. So let me fix this. I'll restart the server. So let me go here with npm start, and let's try it one more time. I'm going to go back to the home page. We'll click on send email, and it looks like it was a success. So let me go back right now. And as you can see here, I have an email from learncodetutorial@gmail.com. Sending with SendGrid is fun and an easy to do anywhere, even with Node.js. Awesome. And that's how we can start sending emails with SendGrid. Again, as you can see, the setup is pretty much the same, where we install a library that they provide. We set up here the key. And in this case, yes, you do want to use the process.env because you don't want them to be publicly available when you push this up to the GitHub. You definitely want to keep them secret. So always, always, always use the .env. Then we set up the message, same deal too, from subject and either text or HTML. And then we just go with send. Now, in a normal scenario, you're probably not going to send back the info to the user. But for testing purposes, I think that was a-okay. Awesome. We're done with this topic. And now we're ready to move on to the next one. All right. And welcome to our next project, accepting payments with Stripe. where we'll learn the workflow of accepting online payments using Stripe, which has become a go-to platform for everything related to online payments. Now, actually, our next project is going to be a full-blown e-commerce API, where users will be able to create orders as well. But unfortunately, since we won't have a front end, accepting payments is not going to be part of that project. And since I think it's essential for you to know and understand the overall online payment workflow, I created this project where we'll exclusively focus on just that. As far as the setup, we're looking for folder number 9, and we're going to do that by CD, then starter, drag and drop, and let's right away run npm install to get all the dependencies, as well as npm start. In the starter, we've got controllers. More specifically, we'll have one, the Stripe controller DB. Even though we won't connect to the database, the folder is still there. Errors, as well as the middleware. And we have the public one, where we'll have a tiny front end. So this is where all the Stripe front end logic is going to be. Then we also have app.js. And in here, again, we require .env. We look for express async errors. We set up the express app. We import not found and error handler middlewares. Then we have express JSON as well as express static. So this just sets up that public folder where we have all our static assets. Then we set up both middlewares not found as well as the error handler one, the process.env port or 3000, and then all the way in the bottom we just invoke start. And if you take a look at the browser, let me navigate there. So localhost 3000, you should see something like this on the screen. Now, there will be a bunch of bugs and errors in the console. Don't worry about it. That's how it's supposed to be for now. Eventually, we will set up the entire backend, meaning our one controller, and then everything is going to work as expected. And before we continue with the project, let me just give you a general overview of how accepting payments online works. And if you took my React project, this probably is going to be a repetition, since most likely you worked on the e-commerce. If you didn't, don't worry, you don't have to understand the entire project. We're just going to be focusing on accepting payments part. And the idea is following, where online, I cannot just directly communicate with Stripe. So I have this dollar amount that the user is about to pay. I cannot just send a request directly to a Stripe. That would be highly, highly insecure, meaning from the front end directly to the Stripe. Instead, what we want to do, we want to communicate with our backend where we send the payment intent. Now, in my React course, we actually built this little logic using serverless function. Now, in this case, we'll work with our node. So we'll set up the route in our Node Express server where we'll handle that. And it goes something like this, where once you refresh the page, notice we have this create payment intent. And actually, we can take a look at the request. So let me make this bigger. Let's keep on scrolling. And notice here all the way in the bottom, I'm actually sending what the user is about to pay. So I have the cart, I have the amount, and I'm good to go. And you'll see why we're sending the cart. I'll explain as we're setting up the functionality. Then from the backend, so from our own server in this case, we communicate with Stripe, which is secure. And then once we get back the confirmation, then we can proceed on the front end with the payment. So that's the general idea. Instead of directly communicating from the front end to the Stripe, we have this middle step where we communicate with our own backend. We get back that payment intent. If everything is correct, then we can proceed with a payment. Hopefully it is clear. And now we can move on to the next step. In order to follow along with the videos, you'll need to create a free Stripe account, and the URL is stripe.com. Again, the URL is stripe.com. Then once you have the account, this is going to be your dashboard. They'll probably ask you to set up a new account, but in my case, since I already have the Comfy store, I'm not going to do that. Now, keep in mind that everything that we're about to do is going to be in the testing mode. So don't worry, no one's going to get charged real money. Then you're looking for developers, more specifically API keys. So this is going to be the publishable key, which we'll set up in the front end, and this is going to be the secret one. So reveal the test key, the secret one, and then set up .env with a variable where you hold the value. And once you're good to go, then continue with the videos. And once we have set up .env and restarted the server, now let's take a look at the docs to see how we can accept payments. And in here, in a dashboard, we want to look for documentation. Then we want to go for payments. You have many options, but we're looking for accept online payments. And what's really cool about these docs, essentially, they provide all the code. And for starters, we have these two options. We can go with pre-built checkout page, or we can go with custom payment flow. And that's the one that we're looking for, the custom payment flow. And you can also notice here that we have platform options, we have front-end options, as well as the backend. Of course, in the React course, we used React as a front-end. In this case, just to simplify this, I went with HTML. And as far as the backend, of course, we're using the Node. Now, before we can do anything, we need to install Stripe, which is already included in the starter. And then when it comes to the front end, we can simply take a look at the checkout HTML. In here, notice they have quite a few scripts that relate to the Stripe. And again, this is going to change depending on your front end. In our case, we'll just focus on this server.js. Then they set up this nice form where we set up the payment. But before we can send the payment, this is where we need to create that intent. And the way they create that intent in the client.js. So this is a front-end one. This is not a controller we're about to create. This is a front-end code. And again, this is going to change depending on your front-end. In React, it was different. In vanilla.js, it goes something like this, where since in the checkout HTML, we have access to the Stripe. So notice here how we're looking for the Stripe. Then in the client.js, so in the browser.js, we have access to the Stripe. And this is where we pass in that public key. So that one is publicly available. Then notice how they set up a post method to some kind of route. So we have this purchase here. So at the moment, we just have the items and they pass in the eddy. So they showcase which item is in the purchase. And then they communicate with that create payment intent. Now, from that create payment intent, we want to send back the positive response. So what we want to do, we want to send back this client secret to the front end. And once we do that, after we have done some other things here before that, then the front end can actually communicate with Stripe. So that's that middle step. Hopefully it is clear. So we have checkout HTML, which is going to change depending on the front end that you're using. But the idea is going to be exactly the same, where you have the purchase. And what you want to do, you want to use the front end JS, the one that's publicly available, pass in there the public key and communicate with the backend. Basically say, hey, listen, this is what the client is trying to get. And then on a server, we'll do some cool things. First of all, we need to require Stripe and then pass in that secret one. And as a side note, yes, this is your real one. So after I'm done with this video, I'll have to change it. But if you're looking at your own docs, this is going to be exactly the key that you're using. Therefore, we want to use the process.env because once we push this up to the GitHub, we don't want other people to see that code. And then I'll talk about these ones once we get there, once we set up the controller. But hopefully you understand that middle step where yes, there's a front end. Yes, we communicate with our own backend. Then from the backend, we get back the payment intent client secret. And once we have that one in place, then from the front end, we can complete the payment. And as far as the setup, what I want to do right now is just check the dependencies. I should have Stripe. If you also have Stripe, you're good to go. You don't need to install anything. And let me just showcase where we can get, again, that public key, because I want you to set it up in your client.js. Because if they won't match, if you'll use my key, then you'll get the errors. So what I want you to do right now is go back to your dashboard and take this key. Notice how they have this nice option to copy to the clipboard. So just copy the public key and then go to the public folder. And it's very, very important. Go to the public one where you have the browser app and copy and paste. So in a star, you'll see my key, which of course is not going to work because the secret is different. In your case, just copy and paste your key and paste it into the Stripe. And I'll talk about all this code one more time, even though I just covered in the following video. But before you do anything, make sure that you take your public key. So this is not your secret one. Please don't put the secret one in here. Take the public key and paste it into the Stripe method. Awesome. And once our public key is in the browser app.js, let's finally start working on our controller. And first thing we want to do is go to app.js and we want to set up a route. Now the route needs to match whatever we have here in the fetch. So name is really up to you. In my case, I named it Stripe. Therefore, in app.js on the server, I'm going to create a post route for the Stripe. Notice the method is post, so we need to use app.post, and then the route is Stripe. If you want to name it differently, be my guest. Just make sure that in the app.js, you do the same thing. So I'm going to navigate here, and I'm looking for app, then post. And as far as the route, it's going to be a Stripe. And here I want to set up the controller. So in the star, you'll find the controllers folder. And in there, you're looking for Stripe controller JS. So let's just start with the basic structure, and then we'll go from there. So in here, let's just go with const and then Stripe. It's going to be a sync, rec, and res. And let's just go with log, or you know what? Before we log anything, let's just send back the res.send and Stripe route. Then we want to go with module.exports, and we'll just export Stripe. Now, once we have exported the Stripe back in the app.js, we're going to import it. So I guess I'm going to do that above the controllers, where I'm going to go with const, and let's call it Stripe controller, and that is equal to require. Then we go 2 levels up or 1 level up in the controllers, and we look for Stripe controller. And where I have the post, I'll go with comma, and I'll pass in the Stripe controller. Now, what you'll notice the moment we run everything, that if we console log rec.body, we'll get a bunch of cool values. So for starters, let's just go with log and then rec.body. And then you want to go back to the front end, so localhost 3000, and just refresh. And what you'll notice in the console is a object with a purchase as well as total amount and shipping fee. So let me go over one more time what's happening. I have index.html, like I said. So this is where we have the form where we'll send the payment to the Stripe, correct? From the front end, we'll send the payment to the Stripe. But before we can do anything, once this page loads, we want to communicate to our own backend. And that's why in the browser app.js, we have this code where this is the purchase. So this is what the client is buying. And keep in mind that in this case, I hard-coded. In the normal application, it goes something like this, where you have the cart. So this is where you can increase, decrease, add the items, remove the items, whatever you want to do. So in here, you'll get the list of all the items the user is buying, as well as the subtotals, shipping fees, and all of that. And then once you go to the checkout, then you send this info to the backend. In this case, just to simplify everything, I hard-coded that. Normally, of course, this is dynamic and it's coming from some kind of state. And I have the purchase, so this is going to be the list of items that the user is buying, as well as total amount and the shipping fee. Now, why these values are so funky is not because I have some massive dollar amounts. In fact, when you work with Stripe, you need to provide the smallest unit of the currency. Meaning, if I'm doing this in dollars, these are cents. So when you're looking at this value, essentially this is $19.99. So this is not $1,999. No, this is in cents because that's what the Stripe requires. Then we keep scrolling. Notice once the page loads, we go with fetch, then Stripe. The method is post, and then we send the purchase, the total amount, as well as the shipping fee. Therefore, in the console, if in the Stripe controller, we go with log and rec.body, we get all of these values. So now in our controller, we need to do two things. We need to verify that the cost of the item is actually what the front end is saying. And I'll talk about it in more detail in the next video. And the second thing, we want to communicate with Stripe and get that client secret. Now, why is that? Well, because if you take a look at the browser app.js, you'll notice that yes, there's a fetch. We go with post method. We send off purchase, total amount, as well as the shipping fee. But if you keep checking .thens, so basically what they do with response, you'll notice over here that somewhere here, they go with data and client secret. So they invoke pay with card and they pass in Stripe card as well as data client secret. Therefore, we need to communicate with Stripe in the controller and get back that client secret. If we don't, if you take a look at the front end right now and try to pay, you'll notice that it's actually not possible. So there is an error and it right away throws it there. So if I go with inspect and take a look at the console, notice it's going to be unexpected token is in JSON, and that is in our function. So unless we send back that response, we won't be able to pay with a card. Beautiful. And once we're clear on what we need to do, let's go back to Stripe controller and let's start by importing the Stripe. And you know what? In order to avoid name collisions, I'm going to go here with Stripe controller. I'll make sure that I export the correct name as well. And then at the top, I'm going to set up a Stripe. It's going to be equal to require. So we're looking for the package. The name, of course, is Stripe. And in here, we want to right away pass in our secret key. So we set up another set of parentheses. And then we go with process.env. And my variable name is Stripe underscore key. So dot and then Stripe underscore and key. Once that is in place inside of the Stripe controller, like I said, we need to do two things. We need to calculate order amount. And this is normally where we communicate with the database. And I'll talk about it in a second. And second, we want to send that amount, whatever is the total order amount, to the Stripe. And we do that using the Stripe, then payment intent, and then dot create. So let's start here by just getting the values out of the rec.body, which you can clearly see in the console, correct? So we're looking for the purchase, then total underscore amount, and comma, and shipping fee as well. So shipping underscore and fee. And all of that is coming from rec.body. Before we send anything to the Stripe, we'll set up some kind of functionality. In this case, it's just going to be calculate order amount. And as a side note, this is coming from their docs as far as the naming. So we're going to go with calculate order amount. And this is going to be a function. Now, normally you'll communicate with your backend, with a database. Why? Well, because you can manipulate these values on a front end. So just because front end says that, yes, the purchase is, I don't know, whatever, this array of values, and the ID is here and the price is here, doesn't mean that it is correct. So you should always, when it comes to money, verify this with your own backend. Now, since this is just a demo project, and we didn't set up our database with the products and all that, of course, we're not going to do that. In our case, we'll just combine both values. We'll combine the total amount as well as the shipping fee. So this is going to give me the total amount for the purchase, correct? But normally what you're going to do, you'll iterate over the list, you'll take the IDs, and then you'll communicate with the database and get back the correct prices. Because again, the user on the front end can easily manipulate with the values. But since we just have the demo project, we won't do that. In our case, we'll just go with return, and we're returning total amount plus shipping fee. So this is going to give me the total for my purchase, correct? Then we want to go with const, and I'm going to call this payment intent, and that is equal to await, then stripe, that's the variable name, then payment intents, so payment intents, then dot, and we're looking for create method. In the create method, we pass in object with two properties, amount, which we're going to set it equal to calculate order amounts. And yes, as a sign out, of course, you can invoke here total amount plus shipping fee directly in the object, or you can set up here a variable. The idea is that normally you'll do more things in this calculate order amount. So let's invoke calculate order amount. This is going to get us a total, and then we need to provide the currency. So we're going to go here with currency, and we're looking for USD. Let's save it. And as far as the response, I'm going to go with res.json. And in here, let's set up a object, and let's call this client secret. And this is important. Make sure that the name is exactly the same, because otherwise the front end is not going to work. So client secret is equal to payment intent, not intent, and then dot and client underscore secret. Let's save it. Let's refresh. And then if everything is correct, we should be able to pay once we add the test card value. Now I want to go back to the server, and I want to show you the response that we're getting back. So we get this massive object with ID, with the amounts, and you can read the rest of the properties. Now the one that we want to send back to the front end is that client underscore secret. And once we have all of this in place, then, like I said, from the front end, we can actually pay with a card. So when it comes to server, we're only responsible for that middle step, where we do two things. First, we communicate with our own backend to make sure that the prices for the items are correct. So we're not relying on the front end. Front end can manipulate these values, and you definitely don't want to sell the item for $1 if the price actually is $100. So in here, you set up some kind of functionality, whether that is a function, whether that is multiple functions, where you get the correct prices for the items, and second, you calculate the total amount. Now, once you have the amount, then you can go with dot create, so stripe payment intents dot create method, and you pass in amount. So this is going to be the total amount, and yes, it's going to be in a cents since the currency is in dollars. Then we're waiting for a response. That's why we have here await, and then to the client, we send back the client secret, however you call this property, and then on the front end, we'll be able to complete the transaction. So if you go to localhost 3000, the test card number is this one. Let's copy and paste. And here you just come up with some dummy values. Just remember to pass in the future date when it comes to expiration. So in this case, I'm going to go with 2 and then 22. And here I can provide some dummy values. So let me go here with 03 and 03. We can pay, and if everything is correct, yep, we see payment succeeded. We click here, and once we navigate to the dashboard, you'll see the payment for $120.97. Hopefully everything was clear, and now you know how to set up functionality to accept payments with Stripe.